We have a lot of astronauts who were from the University of Colorado.
Right.
Yeah,
That
it's a
makes sense.
big NASA research
Yeah.
location.
Oh,
A
yeah.
lot of NASA funding for like atmospheric research.
Right. Yeah, her specialty is that she's like a marine biologist and had done a lot of work on aquatic animals that have like in high pressure situations, real deep in the ocean. And
Oh, really?
I guess
And like, so trying to understand anything related to like seas that once existed on other planets.
I don't know. I don't know how
I'm
that
always
came about.
curious about that
Yeah.
aspect of space exploration, where they're
Right.
learning about seas, that bodies of water that once existed.
Oh, that's
millions of
fascinating.
Years ago.
The whole 50th anniversary of the moon landing is like, I really got into it for about, as soon as they started talking about it a week before, I just watched every documentary on it as it came out.
I was, so I'm 62. I was in California visiting relatives when they landed on the moon. And I just remember that was the coolest thing.
Yeah, right.
I was like 12 years old
Yeah.
or something.
That's like a perfect age too, because everything is already sort of filled with like wonder at 12.
Yeah.
You're old enough to also kind of get it, but
I have never understood people who think that was a staged event.
yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. So ridiculous.
Yeah. Really.
They had on PBS, one of the things they had was they did a reenactment of it, but it was all using the real audio. So they had all the audio for the duration of the time that were doing the landing, and some actors acted out, and it made it very real. It was very cool.
Anytime you're ready.
All right. So one of something I neglected to do is bring release forms.
Mhm.
So if you could, I'm going to ask you, are you willing to allow your likeness to be shown in the documentary we're making called Brain Changers?
Yes.
And in any related promotional material?
Yes, I'm willing to do that.
Wonderful. Would you go ahead and introduce yourself by
Sure.
your name, and you need him to spell it?
Yeah, that would be
Okay.
Should I look at you, or should I look? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Tristan Noyes, and I'm Executive Director of the Maine Grain Alliance, and my name is spelled Tristan, last name Noyes, Noyes.
Wonderful. So can you tell us what?
I'm going to just have you scoot a little bit more to the left.
Move it to
Yeah,
where
just
you
to
want
the
me,
left,
so that I know.
Because I have a feeling that maybe I might regret this, but I would want to do it instead of having.
What
to
might you
here.
regret?
The background.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Are we okay with the background? Yeah.
Okay, I feel
You
like
like
that's better. Yeah, it's just there were a couple things that were bothering me.
I like
and
the sides.
I thought the better thing to do is just say something.
If you say something that we don't like, we have
Yeah.
tools.
Oh, sorry.
Or if I say something you
Yeah,
don't
really.
like, they're
I'm closer, I
they're
think.
closer.
Or if the wind just blows.
Let's hope not. Yeah. All right, can we continue?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So can you tell us what is the Maine Grain Alliance?
Yeah, the Maine Grain Alliance is an organization that exists to help build the regional grain economy in the Northeast of the United States. We're a group of millers and maltsters, farmers, brewers, seed researchers, land conservationists, and in general, folks who are very interested in seeing local grains have a resurgence.
And when was that established?
It was established in 2010, although the event that we're at right now, the Kneading Conference, began in 2007, and the Maine Grain Alliance grew out of what we learned having held the Kneading Conference for a number of years.
And who do you serve?
We serve anyone that touches grain in any way, shape, or form, and especially those folks who are trying to capture grain for its highest and most valuable use, which in our world has been for food, for malting grade purposes, so bread, beer, but especially for folks who are interested in nutritional health and for the creation of regional grain economies around purposeful jobs and ways to be able to reconnect to the land.
Can you elaborate on what a regional grain economy is?
Yeah. We're interested in being able to look at, from seed to table, the process that grain goes through and capture as much of the value chain as we can here in a way that serves the people of our region. So what that might mean is that grain that's grown in Maine, for example, might also be cleaned in Maine, stored in Maine, milled, stone ground, milled in Maine, and then sold to bakeries that are also in Maine. But maybe even beyond Maine, Maine might serve as sort of a grain hub for the Northeast and New England. And so we're very interested in helping to sort of create the pathways by which bakers talk to millers, millers talk to farmers, farmers talk to academic institutions to learn about seed variety trials, and really the thread that interconnects all the different parts of the grain community.
Do you have much of a direct relationship with farmers? What is the relationship you have with farmers?
We do have a direct relationship with farmers, and in fact, I am a farmer by trade. I found the Maine Grain Alliance because I was beginning an organic farm with my brother. We've come from a long history of farming in our families, but we were in a position where we needed to learn more about local grain and how to grow grain and looking for resources because those resources have largely dissipated in many places around the country over the years, especially for understanding how to grow it for food grade purposes. And so as I was searching for information, I found the Maine Grain Alliance, and it serves as a very valuable resource for farmers to be able to not only understand how to grow grain, but also the markets that exist for grain.
So what is food grade?
Yeah, so it's fascinating because in Maine, we have about 50,000 acres of grain that we're growing. And that's quite a lot compared to much of the Northeast. But the vast majority of that grain has been traditionally sold into commodity markets or for feed purposes. And what we've been helping establish is a food grade economy that supports a level of seed quality that allows for both food and beverage processors to be able to use it and to be sold back to consumers. So that might mean stone ground milling. It might mean that the seed is high enough quality to be used in a malt house. It might mean that that we're growing flint corn for the purposes of making corn tortillas even. There's a lot of different ways that can manifest itself, but we've been trying to support that growth because that allows for a greater capture of value at a lot of different levels along the kind of grain value chain.
Were there other places around the country that were an inspiration or continue to be an inspiration for? Are you influenced by places beyond Maine?
Very much so, and even around the world. When the Maine Grain Alliance was starting to take hold and form in 2010, we'd had a couple of years of learning about different places in the country that were leading in the creation of real bread, sourdough breads using whole grains. And what we had learned is that there was a large bottleneck around the ability for some of these bakeries who were concentrating on this to be able to get consistent and high quality products in volume. And much of the beginning, in fact, the origins of why we started the first Kneading Conference was that there was a community activist in Central Maine who had traveled to the West Coast and went to a bread fair and thought, this is something really special. People are kind of gathered around this ancient symbol of community, and this, it has a history in our state. Why not try to reinvigorate that history through some important work? And so that's that was in the Pacific Northwest actually originally. That led us to thinking about where is it that in the world that has similar type of climate to the Northeast that we could learn about how to grow grains for milling purposes. And the University of Maine Cooperative Extension then got involved, and we started collaborating with them, and that culminated in a trip to Denmark. And we've, since that time, helped to create really amazing relationships and learn from many, many different places, not only just in the Northeast, places like Vermont, but also we now have a really robust community of Quebecois bakers that are part of our network. North Carolina has a lot of symbiotic relationships with the types of things that we're interested in here in the Maine Grain Alliance, and the types of initiatives that we think are important. Colorado is certainly has been a fascinating state to watch, and we have a lot to learn from all of these places, even if they're some of them that are entering into sort of learning about grain economy in the last few years.
Can you say anything about the types of grains that have been restored?
Yeah. Yeah, we have worked with seed savers from a number of different places across the Northeast. These are really remarkable individuals who have been keeping alive in their backyards or on their small farms very small quantities of grain that are well suited to our growing environments. They may also be grains that have are ancient grains, or what we would call landrace grains, which have been adapted to a certain region over a long period of time and growing conditions. So it's sort of unique unto its place. It's really the sort of the definition of what terroir is in some ways. And what we have done is we have looked at those, thought which of these varieties might do well in and to be able to put into the hands of talented farmers to grow out, to create commercially viable quantities, and also in doing that create markets, a niche market for really flavorful and different types of grains that haven't been available. So one of our biggest success stories has been the work around growing out an Estonian wheat called Servinta. We started with about 14 pounds that had been kept by a seed saver named Will Bonsall in Industry, Maine, and we now have over, I think, last year we had over 40 acres of the Servinta. It's made its way to market. It's being sold as flour, it's being sold as berries, it's being used in a whole host of different types of bread-related stuff. But we also have been growing, there's about 6 or 7 different types of flint corns that we've been restoring. And flint corn in Maine is important to restore and keep at commercially viable quantities, because there are only so many flint corn varieties that have the ability to be grown in our shorter season and with lesser heat units days. And so without those varieties, we lose the ability to grow flint corn, which has been growing in Maine for thousands of years.
What do you consider the biggest challenges to the viability of your efforts?
One of the biggest challenges, and certainly the biggest bottleneck right now that we are experiencing in our regional grain economy, is the lack of post-harvest handling infrastructure. And that's different from farm to farm, but generally, some of the pieces that are missing are appropriately scaled drying, sorting, and storage equipment, cleaning ability to be able to separate weed seed, different types of moisture-related drying practices. And why that's important is that when we're taking grain out of the field, if we can't get it clean to a place that is also very dry, or to a moisture level that's acceptable to be able to be sold to mills or to other food grade purposes, then it has to be sold for feed or for something else, and you're losing a higher price. It also is important to the longevity of how long you can keep your grain in your storage tanks. If you have good storage, you can keep it for a longer period of time, be able to sell when the appropriate and best time to sell is, and also mitigate some risk in years where grain may have a bad year for whatever reason because of weather-related issues, that you've got some that from previous years you can still sell.
So those tanks in front of or on the side of the jailhouse.
Yeah.
Those are for what?
So those tanks on the side of the main grains grist mill are used for offloading and holding grain that has been harvested by farms and cleaned to some extent. Usually, some form of cleaning has been done on the farm, whether it be through a clipper-style cleaner or some other type of screen cleaner, generally speaking. And then what's neat about that system when you see these tanks on the side is that the reason that Maine Grains purchased the county jail that now is where the mill is that it had vertical height. And so that whole system is predicated on the idea of taking grain, putting it up through the top of the jailhouse up high, and letting the grain come down through a series of cleaning and measures, and finally into the mill, and then finally down onto the ground floor in the form of flour. So it sort of goes up, gets cleaned, and comes down. Yeah.
I'm just about done. I just want to. Do you have any other? A question, a very kind of broad, philosophical, almost question that I have for you, has to do with the idea of a movement that's going on that you're a part of. Have you, first of all, do you consider this a movement?
Yeah.
And if you could talk about that.
Yeah, it doesn't take long to realize that we're part of something really special, and you know it's a movement when you hear these remarkable individuals who are making differences in their communities all across the country, re-establishing economies and creativity in agriculture in ways that just hasn't been done in generations in some cases. And what that's allowing for is not only a more vibrant agricultural ecosystem, but one that is helping people feel more hopeful about the future of what they eat. And bread plays an incredibly important role in our understanding of community, and for that reason, when you start to see these individuals and businesses and farms and millers and maltsters and bakers and brewers all coming together for a common purpose and supporting each other toward really unique and valuable lessons learned, I guess, it's something you can't help but get wrapped up in. Yeah.
All right, that's wonderful.
Cool.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Hopefully somewhere in my rambling
that's